Hi folks, we are back. I wasn't planning to do another video for a while, just because I felt like I included a lot in the last one. Covered a lot of ground. I am continuing to work on the paper. It is not done until Friday. So I've got today and tomorrow, or sorry, it's due on Saturday. Today and tomorrow to work on it, and then I turn it on Saturday. Anyways, I was having some additional thoughts that were related, but not exactly the same as the material I talked about last time. I'm in the next module, which I'm beginning to study, is on the scientific theories of Goethe. You know, the same guy who wrote Faust, and he's kind of a Renaissance man. He was like a statesman and poet. And apparently a botanist of sorts, an evolutionary botanist, early on. So the reason why this is so fascinating to me is that he approaches science from a completely unique perspective. Like, his perspective on science is intimate. Like, it's subjective. It's a subjective science, if you will. And that sounds really strange until you make a parallel with the artist, because that's what Goethe is. He's an artist and then a scientist. And if you think about the way an artist observes a subject that they're going to render, paint, sculpt, whatever, they look at every curve. It's a direct experience. They're looking at the shades of light and dark, and the colors and the contours and the contrasts, and all these subtleties of things, and they're allowing themselves to kind of get lost in the subject. It's like an actor preparing for a role. They try and get lost in their character, try and have the feelings that character has, so they can then act in the way that character should act for the part that they're in. Goethe sees the role of scientist like that. So it's not the goal is not to get an objective observation, and Goethe's very clear on this. He says it's foolish. In order to try and create an objective observation, you have to create a complete fabrication of reality. And he looks at Newton as somebody who's completely deluded with his own mind, because of the way that these elaborate experimentation methods he constructs. And Goethe goes to point out how Newton could reach his insights in a way that would not only allow him to describe what is happening, but also allow him to keep it in context instead of abstracting it into a mathematical algorithm, and that being the fact of the matter. Instead, to encounter the subject of motion as an experience, and that can include a mathematical algorithm, but it doesn't end with the algorithm. The algorithm isn't ultimately more real than the phenomena it explains. That's Goethe's point, I think. So to go back to the method of observation, Goethe is all about getting to know the subject you're observing. It's like a writer who sits at a coffee shop and observes people and writes down little character sketches about their story, and then over time kind of like notices to see where things connect, and has this empathetic feeling towards his subject of this potentially fictional narrative, for the writer anyway. But for the scientist gets to do that with the subject of study. It would be if the writer could then go speak to this person and become friends with the person that they're going to write about, and talk to them about their lives, and engage with them in personal therapy sessions, and find out their feelings about things. This is Goethe's method of science. Now, you can't sit down and do that with a plant, but you can observe the plant and do so in a way that encourages you to understand what it's doing. Like, what is the plant's process? Like, one of the great distinctions that Goethe makes is that science should focus on the process of things happening, rather than just the products, right? Instead of classifying a plant by what it looks like after it's done growing, it makes a lot more sense to look at how it grows, the process through which it grows. And through this, this is a part I really enjoy, he basically introduces the concept of archetype into evolution, which is of course a Platonic thought structure. It's, coming from Plato's ideas or ultimate forms, and later used by Carl Jung in his psychology to describe these archetypal thought patterns and things. But for Goethe, it's the archetype is this process that plants and ultimately animals and everything kind of follows, that like kind of expresses their nature. So it's a very process-oriented view, and it's an artistic view, and it's a type of science. Like he was studying these phenomena for decades. I think he spent 50 years studying plants, and he was doing it in this way. So he's doing it. It's Goethe's subjective science. It's the way a poet would do science. And myself, having poetic inclinations, can relate to this. That's when I write poetry. I try to let myself kind of fall into the imagery. I try and, I'll sit there and I'll look out at the ocean, or I'll look at the stars, or I'll just kind of try and get quiet and try and engage. Like, what does it feel like to be a wave in the ocean, or to be a plant growing, or whatever it is I happen to be writing about. I try and do that whole actor thing where you kind of try and get into your subject. And that gives me a certain feeling for what I'm going to write. So then I feel like there's an intimacy to it, that I'm actually encountering some sort of essence of reality that is implied by the subject that I'm writing about. And the dangers with this method, of course, they're obvious, right? I'm sure you've all been thinking about them already. You're like, well, what if you just make stuff up and you're just, you're deluded? And that's the problem. That's the whole reason for having objectivity, is to remove personal biases and projections. Goethe has bad news for us in this area. He says it's impossible. And, modern scientists will agree. You can look at quantum physics and you can see, subatomic particles. We can predict their speed or their location, but not both, because the way that we look at them changes them, which means that our very active observing of trying to observe a subject changes it, which means that we're biasing our results. How is that terribly different than having a feeling about a subject that you're doing, and then using that to direct your investigations into it? The other thing that's kind of cool is, I thought about this later, is relating this type of intuitive, because that's what it is. It's an intuitive, artistic kind of process for deriving knowledge from the natural world, is to liken it in a certain sense to dreams. Because, your intuition is a semi-conscious process, maybe. I can't call it unconscious, because, we can engage in intuition. But we aren't exactly sure how it works, or why it doesn't work when it doesn't, or why it does when it does. We can't on demand with our conscious mind have an intuitive experience. Intuition happens to us. Somehow, some part of our unconscious mind, or whatever, puts together certain things in a way that we consciously haven't done yet, or whatever. There's a great story, a classic story. I can't remember the name of the scientist, but the scientist that discovered the structure of the carbon molecule was working on it forever and couldn't figure it out. And finally, he had a dream of a snake biting its tail, and woke up and said, "Aha! It's a ring!" So his some part of his unconscious mind was engaging with its conscious struggles, and spoke to him through imagery in a dream, because that's where the unconscious can come to the surface. So you can look at Goethe's approach to science somewhat similarly, in the sense that he wants to use the artistic intuition to more deeply understand the thing he's studying, so he can not just see the outsides of it, if you will, but understand its essence, its process, what drives its existence and makes it do what it does. The danger is a projection, of course, to the danger is to think that you're dreaming a snake instead of a carbon thing, because the unconscious mind speaks in imagery, and it doesn't have it doesn't speak to us literally, it speaks to us metaphorically. This is the basis of all depth psychology, and regardless of what you think about that in terms of validity, I think we can safely say that dreams do bring to the surface unconscious aspects of mind. They process experiences and thoughts and emotions that we're having and present them to us in some kind of an imagery format. They arise in our dreams. Things that we're thinking about come to us in dreams, because that's just how the mind works. This stuff is surfacing. It's the interface between the conscious and unconscious. Oh, that was exciting. Anyways, this subject is really fascinating, and the idea of the intuition as a tool for scientific exploration is not something I've ever really jumped into very deeply. So anyways, I'll get back to you soon. This has been a longer video than I intended, and my phone just fell down, so I will continue to drive without running my mouth for the rest of my drive. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.